male fascist brute force phallic Apollonian logic, right? Math. Math! Better than food, man. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Great to see you as always. Hope you're doing fucking fantastic, because I sure as hell am. Get that coffee from Sumatra. It's an exciting day. It's an exciting day. If you'd like to just skip to the review, the timestamps are below. There's a lot of house cleaning. Today I'm announcing a Better Than Food read-along, the first ever, wherein you and I read the full book together and discuss it on Patreon in the comments section and in the private Discord, as well as the Patron-only live streams that follow these reviews. I will be answering all the comments on Patreon and Discord so long as they're appropriate. Hell, even if they're inappropriate, I'll give it my best college try. Perhaps especially if they're inappropriate. So this is my first go, this is my first rodeo at this thing, and the first book will be the colossal Sexual Personae, Art and Decadence from Nefertiti to Emily Dickinson. A vast commentary on sex, gender, art, literature, poetry, nature, Western culture, and of course its downfall, found in decadence. It's the very ambitious magnum opus of the American academic Camille Paglia, published in 1990. It's a dense, often repetitive, not necessarily a bad thing, kind of helpful actually, anecdote-filled, sprawling monolith of fascinating opinion and criticism from a contentious, contrarian, fiery, wickedly intelligent mind with a purpose. Holy shit. I'm listening to the audiobook in addition. I discovered they had one yesterday, but I'm primarily focused on reading it. The audiobook is just to make sure I get it all. You know, it's useful. You read the chapter, then you listen to it a few times and just make sure you've covered all the bases. I find I actually tend to pick up different things whether I'm listening to it or reading it. I far prefer reading it, actually. The whole tone is different, but you know, it's useful to have the audiobook. So I've linked to both below. You can purchase them there if you want to support the show. I found them both useful, but you have to read the book. In this enormous contrarian work of social and feminist, second wave, very important criticism, she explores art, literature, history, Shakespeare, Sade, Blake, Emily Dickinson, the Egyptians, Renaissance figures, Byron, Elvis Presley, and many more. It's outstanding. It's all encompassing in a way that few books are. So on Patreon, this will be a full series discussing every chapter of the book, all of them. The series will be composed of approximately 12 videos going for the rest of the year, including this one, and I will let you know beforehand which chapters are going to be covered. I can already tell I could easily produce twice as many. There's so much interesting stuff to discuss in here. This review, just chapter 1, is so bloated with stuff. I can't, like, it's like twice as long as a normal video and it's only for one chapter of the book. The whole series will be composed of about 12 videos, including this one. Give or take 1 or 2 videos, it depends. For that reason, I will also be doing an interactive patron-only live stream, further discussing things I enjoyed in the chapter, or chapters, a couple days after I post each video so everybody has time to read the chapters. The sign-up link is below. These videos will not be a derivative of the work. They are not at all a substitute for reading the book. I'm just going to be discussing my thoughts and opinions, and you know, what certain things remind me of, connections I make, etc. You really have to have bought and read the book in order to appreciate it. I'm certainly not the first to say it, but this book is a massive gateway drug, you know, to just all kinds of art and literature and ideas and philosophy and psychology. And if you're going to buy one book this year, it's already better than food. You know it's better than food. It's incredible. You got to read it. But there will be an independent video for each chapter or chapters, as many chapters will be condensed into one video, with my thoughts and commentary, analysis, further reading recommendations, whatever I can bring to the table. And I'll be making it a priority to answer all the comments on Patreon and Discord. And of course, the book and coffee jar shall be performed for every video posted, as the videos will be charged to patrons. If you win and already have Sexual Personae, which is, of course, highly likely, I'll just send you whichever book most appeals to you from the ones she mentions in Sexual Personae, of which there are an abundance. So this first video in chapter 1 will be public. The rest of the videos in the series will be for patrons only. Along this series, I will be doing other patron-only content too. The next patron-only review, as recently chosen by my patrons on a poll, will be Ice by Anna Kavan, which I'm looking forward to very much. So if you wanted to read this book but were intimidated or you thought you didn't have time, there's literally no better time. Come on, get in the car. We're gonna go slow and get as much as we can out of it the first time. It's gonna be a blast. You can click on the link below in the description to sign up and donate whatever you can afford, but the minimum tier is $5 per video, though you can set a limit to fit your budget. Yes, that does mean you can pay just $5 a month, approximately, taxes and fees, depends on where you're at in the world, and you'll get access to all the posts. I'd appreciate more if you can afford it, of course, but if you can't, I totally understand and I'd be happy to have you either way. This is an incredibly intimidating book that could easily take up a year of your life. Now you can read it along with us, take your time, have people to discuss it with, get in some fights, fisticuffs, just joking. Get everything you can get out of it the first time, and have a ton of directions to move in afterward, because your reading list will be massive. I repeat, your reading list will be massive. This is the gateway drug to end all gateway drugs, and I am certainly not the first to say that. So yeah, this book already provides you with plenty of further reading suggestions, and I will be reviewing some of them along the way, just to kind of add to the whole experience so we can, we can get more knowledge of these books that she's discussing in great detail in the book, in Sexual Personae, as this series will be going for the rest of the year, and probably into 2025 as well. Some of the titles heavily referenced in here that I plan to review will be My Life by Benvenuto Cellini, As You Like It and Antony and Cleopatra by Shakespeare, as well as The Tempest. I'm going to do The Tempest this year. The Fairy Queen by Spencer, Freud's The Uncanny. She doesn't mention the uncanny, at least that I've gotten to yet. She just talks about Freud quite a bit. So that'll be my first Freud that I'm going to review this year. Wuthering Heights from Bronte, The Poetry of Emily Dickinson, Byron, Keats, Shelley, Wordsworth, and Coleridge. Auntie Mame by Patrick Dennis, favorite book of Tilda Swinton. Curious trivia for you. And for a stretch goal, Juliet by the Marquis de Sade. Stretch goal because it's 1,200 fucking pages. It's and I've already reviewed William Blake and Huysmans, though both will receive re-reviews eventually. I think Huysmans before Blake. This year, not sure, but one can dream. I really want to re-review and review properly Against Nature, which is one of my favorite books that she mentions in here. But yeah, I'll pick up some of these books and I will review them along the way of the series. And speaking of buying books, the executive producer and sponsor of today's video is Ageless Literature, rare booksellers based out of St. Petersburg, Florida, which is where I'm located, and it is hot! If you're interested in curated collectible books, and if you're watching this show, I imagine there's a high percentage chance that you are, please head over to agelessliterature.com and check them out. They have got a fantastic selection of stuff, including a signed Hemingway in a very unusual fashion. He signs his name Ernesto. Thought that was funny. I just saw a very cool vintage edition of Neuromancer by William Gibson, which I need to review here soon. They've also partnered with a bindery that has a database of 5 million out-of-print books that they can have printed and bound in leather just for you, which I think is an awesome service. If you love books, if you love rare books, please consider supporting small book dealer businesses and check them out at agelessliterature.com, and don't forget to use the code BetterThanFood to get 10% off your order. The link is below. Please check them out. Thanks a bunch. This book is an entire literature degree unto itself with a minor in history. It's not the easiest book in the world, but it's not Hegel. Sure, it's long, but not difficult to read, and worth it 1,000 times over. So if you'd like to come aboard on this adventure, the link is below, and we'd be happy to have you. I'll see you there, and thank you very much for your support. And thank you very much to all my patrons for your support. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to describe Sexual Personae, but any attempt at a pithy description is necessarily severely reductive because it's so enormous. But Sexual Personae is a collection of exploratory essays, thematically linked by Paglia's focus on tracing the historical origins of modern attitudes and perspectives in Western art and culture. As she says in the preface, her approach combines disciplines: literature, art history, psychology, and religion. That's just the combination for her approach. I mean, she discusses many, many, many more things. In the book, she explores male and female archetypes throughout history and art. The personae, right? The masks. Harkens back to Greek theater. But the title was inspired by the Ingmar Bergman film Persona, which is excellent if you haven't seen it. Classic art film. The seeds of the book actually came from her writing about Amelia Earhart decades and decades ago, which I thought was interesting, whose plane they may have just discovered not too long ago, coincidentally, in the ocean. They picked up a plane, and I believe it was her model, and because she was famously lost, she disappeared way back when. But jury's still out on it, but that'd be really interesting if they found that finally. So, the book begins in an operatic, almost like Wagnerian fashion, right? Chapter 1, Sex and Violence or Nature and Art. Flight of the Valkyries in literary form. Dun, 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 wait, Italian. Verdi. Verdi's Requiem, yeah. Only a classical performance I've ever seen. Verdi's Requiem as essay. She prefers Puccini. She actually mentioned she listened to Puccini while she was writing the Emily Dickinson chapter. So Paglia has said that this book was written to please no one and offend everyone. Perfect ambition for a book. Perhaps there's no better way of describing what the book is concerned with than reading the preface. The one-page preface. It's quite short, in contrast. Sexual Personae seeks to demonstrate the unity and continuity of Western culture, something that has inspired little belief since the period before World War I. The book accepts the canonical Western tradition and rejects the modernist idea that culture has collapsed into meaningless fragments. She's referring to the post-structuralists, Foucault, Derrida, or postmodernists as they're called today, etc. I argue that Judeo-Christianity never did defeat paganism, which still flourishes in art, eroticism, astrology, and pop culture. The first volume of Sexual Personae examines antiquity, the Renaissance, and Romanticism from the late 18th century to 1900. I demonstrate that Romanticism turns almost immediately into decadence, which I find throughout major 19th century authors, even Emily Dickinson. The second volume will show how movies, television, sports, and rock music embody all the pagan themes of classical antiquity. My approach throughout the book combines disciplines: literature, art history, psychology, and religion. What is art? How and why does an artist create? The amorality, aggression, sadism, voyeurism, and pornography in great art have been ignored or glossed over by most academic critics. I fill in the space between artist and artwork with metaphors drawn from the Cambridge School of Anthropology. My largest ambition is to fuse Fraser with Freud. What is sex? What is nature? I see sex and nature as brutal pagan forces. My stress on the truth in sexual stereotypes and on the biologic basis of sex differences is sure to cause controversy. I reaffirm and celebrate women's ancient mystery and glamour. I see the mother as an overwhelming force who condemns men to lifelong sexual anxiety from which they escape through rationalism and physical achievement. I show how much of Western life, art, and thought is ruled by personality, which the book traces through recurrent types or personae, masks, in parentheses. My title was inspired by Ingmar Bergman's cruel, dreamy masterpiece, Persona. My method is a form of sensationalism. I try to flesh out intellect with emotion and to induce a wide range of emotion from the reader. I want to show meaning arising from simple everyday things, cats, grocery stores, bridges, chance encounters, and thereby to liberate criticism and interpretation from their imprisonment in classroom and library. That is, in part, what the book is about. The first sign that you have a great piece of work on your hands is when it defies easy definition. But I'll give a pragmatic reduction so you can get an idea of what this is, exactly. Sexual Personae is the magnum opus of the American academic Camille Paglia. It's a collection of 24 essays, mostly, fusing art history and literature with social criticism and psychology. I have no idea what category of literature Sexual Personae definitively resides in. I've seen it described as theory, cultural criticism, feminist art criticism, and close to poetry. That was Grail Marcus. Nice one. It's a sprawling tapestry of ideas and historical anecdotes and connections between artists and eras. Art criticism that also functions as a psychological map of Western culture. Lots of nods to Freud. It's also a defense of the achievements of Western culture and the men and the masculine energies responsible for them. It's also a scathing attack on progressivist idealism and modern feminism. Don't get it wrong though, she's very pro-sex. She's pro-gay, she's pro-porn, she's pro-sex, etc. She has a lot of traditionally left-leaning attributes. She's just not crazy. And I believe to some degree it's also a defense of religious wisdom and art from a self-proclaimed lesbian atheist. So, it makes sense to me. Paglia taught herself to write by physically copying out passages she liked in notebooks. So there are all these voices working through her, right? As she describes in this interview below. And that's how she learned to write. While it may not all be accurate or true, doing your research for this one you would have needed an army. It really seems like she gave it her all. I've only spotted one thing that seems incorrect, which was actually, it was just an anecdote about the vomitorium in Rome in relation to her description of their excess. And the vomitorium actually, historically, people got it wrong. I don't know if it was proven wrong by when she wrote it. I don't think it had been. But the vomitorium was a mistake. Like, the vomitorium was this... They thought that the Colosseum had these vomitoriums for the excessive Romans to go and vomit the food they'd just eaten so they could eat more, as a sign that was indicative of how excessive and disgusting they were. The vomitorium is actually, it's just a word. It's the wrong connotation with the word. The vomitorium literally meant it was like an exit for the Colosseum for like people to vomit out, like just to exit through, like a hall, right? So if I'm not mistaken. So it was just an architectural thing. It had nothing to do with like actual vomiting. It was just, they called it the vomitorium because it was like architecturally, this is where people exited the Colosseum. So it was way more interesting before that, It's kind of sad actually, because that just would have made the Roman Empire so much more disgusting and decadent than it already was, I guess. But they had plenty going on already. It's not like they weren't. It's not like that was the only thing that made the Roman Empire degenerate. So as an attempt at cultural theory, it's not only outrageously ambitious and audacious, but the experience of reading it, contrary in the extreme to many other history books, is absolutely riveting, electrifying. I mean, it's really like reading philosophy, but really like exuberant philosophy. It's almost like Nietzschean. I mean, she is definitely going through Freud, Sade, and Nietzsche, as she says. You can sense all of them working through her. It's almost jubilant, but like angry at the same time. You know, it's very Nietzsche, like just like art history with a hammer, something like that. I don't know. I think this is because of Paglia's affinity for poetry and to some degree the better parts of romanticism or theatricality. Drama in all caps, right? Shakespeare, Freud, Sade, Nietzsche, no? Sex, passion, violence, death. I mean, she is Italian, right? Which is to say, she gets it. Drama, that is. She gets it. I wish I were Italian. Alas, I come from the stock of timid northerners. Paglia herself defies definition, intentionally so. A proponent of both sexual freedom, within reason, and conservatism. She's a libertarian, right? Her whole thing is about heralding the freedom of the individual. Critical thinking, agency, responsibility, autonomy. You know? As she puts it, anti-dogma, anti-ideology, a free mind, and a free voice. I love it. The right to think what you please and the right to say what you want. Right? That's what she claims she stands for, and she certainly seems to. As do I. But with like, you know, what would you call it these days? Big dick energy. Major big dick energy. As if in lieu of a colossal phallus, she just drops this on your desk. Boom! How you like me now? I imagine for younger readers in college, this will be one of those I didn't know you were allowed to do this moments. Which is sad because it just shows how aggressive things have gotten here in America. Because these days it's more like, typically, you're not allowed to do this, right? It was the same back then, in the early 90s, for multiple reasons, right? There was a lot of political correctness, especially in the academic institutions. It's gotten worse, obviously, but back then it was pretty bad too. So you weren't allowed to do it back then, right? So of course, she went and did it, with style. Sex and Violence or Nature and Art is a bombshell of an opener. I mean, a standalone essay that I can scarcely believe will be topped by anything else that follows in the book. It's just so damn good. It's a boiling cauldron of contrarian ideas. Huge broad strokes here, but like the distilled, purest essence of all of the beautiful narcotics she's produced from her critical research that set up much of what she discusses throughout the rest of the book. Flowing into one another, just this, it's like Grail Marcus said, it's almost like poetry. It's like, it really just flows from one idea to the next. It's very serpentine, it's very like Medusa's head, right? You're just like looking at all these beautiful, gorgeous snakes just like writhing on her face and shit, and then she turns you to stone, and then you're like, fuck! No, it's amazing. It does stop you in your tracks. It is kind of Medusa-like. You just like read this book and you're just like, oh, I'm made of stone. Paglia's thesis is that nature is a vastly indifferent system with absolute dominance over mankind. And our modes of ideological defense, noble as they may be, however sophisticated, crumble immediately under her devastating will, which in no way prioritizes the betterment of mankind necessarily. There's a little bit of wiggle room for argument there, but as she puts it, nature cares only for species, never for individuals. And this is very true. Unless you are Genghis Khan or Rasputin. Nature annihilates idealism, right? There is nothing about nature that is inherently good, nor evil. It doesn't think in those terms, right? Good and evil, it could be argued, technically don't exist, and certainly not within the realm of nature. But we are a part of it, nature that is, and mankind persists. And Paglia says that society is its supreme weapon against the will of nature. God help us. And we will always submit and fall and be subsumed, inevitably, by it. As she says, nature's fascism is greater than that of any society. And she would be right. There is no civilization that was not finally eroded by the laws of Mother Nature. That bitch. This doesn't at all sit well with you and I, does it? No. Yeah, that's her point. Gender, for her, is not a choice, but an imposition. By nature. Gender is a law of nature. And like other laws of nature, you fuck with it at your own peril. That's not to say that we shouldn't ever do things that seem unnatural. I mean, we've built atomic bombs and learned to fly, you know. We've cured horrific diseases. I mean, it's like, but you know, if you're going against the grain of something that fundamental, you better know what you're doing. Paglia sees sex and nature as brutal pagan forces to be contended with, as she says in the preface. You know, sex being the subset of nature, as she says. And this was done by Christianity, the Apollonian response to the Chthonian chaos. I'm a fan of Lovecraft and pantheistic mythology, so the lingo she employs in here was highly enjoyable. A criticism of this book that I've read, I can't remember where, is that it's just telling conservative men what they want to hear. Don't worry, she'll piss them off plenty too. She's absolutely pro-abortion, for example. In this chapter, she introduces these two terms she uses elsewhere in and for the rest of the book. Apollonian, referencing the Greco-Roman god of, sun and order, and the Chthonian, which is a Greek word meaning earth, or of the earth, or under the earth. Reminds me of the word base. She chose it as a synonym for Dionysian, which she felt had regrettably soft connotations, and I agree with her. Earth, the word earth in Hebrew is feminine, I realized while reading the Old Testament. But yeah, she describes, the Chthonian is not of the earth's surface, but rather of its bowels, right? The basest of the base. The deep sex, death, gut place, as Michael Girard has said, or something like that. She chose it to mean the same thing as Dionysian, but of course in popular culture or popular literary culture, it immediately conjures Lovecraft's infamous mythological, fictitious elder god of chaos from his most famous short story, The Call of Cthulhu, which I've reviewed for patrons, link below. It's one of the greatest short stories ever written, certainly one of the greatest horror short stories ever written. So yeah, Apollonian and Chthonian, sky and swamp as she refers to them. Sky of bright order and progress and achievement. Swamp of death, chaos, disintegration, liquid decay and corrosion. And she extends the metaphor to gender as well. Male, fascist, brute force, phallic, Apollonian logic, right? Math. Female, Chthonian, dark, swampy chaos mother, who we all return to, by the way, all-encompassing, solipsistic, self-contained. The great evil bitch mother nature, impossible to escape her clutches. All men shall bow to her desire. Between shit and piss we're born. That kind of thing. Yes, all men, but all women too, for that matter. She rules over us all. So yeah, right from the get-go, imitating Genesis from the first chapter of the Old Testament, the chapter starts with, "In the beginning was nature, the background from which and against which our ideas of God were formed. Nature remains the supreme moral problem. We cannot hope to understand sex and gender until we clarify our attitude toward nature. Sex is a subset to nature. Sex is the natural in man. Society is an artificial construction, a defense against nature's power. Without society, we would be storm-tossed on the barbarous sea that is nature. Society is a system of inherited forms reducing our humiliating passivity to nature. We may alter these forms, slowly or suddenly, but no change in society will change nature. We are merely one of a multitude of species upon which nature indiscriminately exerts its force. Nature has a master agenda we can only dimly know." We're not nature's favorites. Damn. Excuse me, we're having some lighting issues with the storm outside. Yeah, nature remains the supreme moral problem. Right. This morning when I was reading Genesis, I was observing the fact that there was in fact something before all of this was created, right? Darkness. You know how it goes. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Now, this Norton Critical Edition of the Old Testament raises the question that must immediately rise, but which had never occurred to me before, and that is, but who created darkness, right? As the edition says, Genesis quite clearly avoids implying that God created darkness, that he was responsible for the creation of chaos, which is what the earth and the space seems to be engulfed in prior to the creation of earth and mankind and the stars and so on and so forth. But yeah, chaos is there. Chaos is pre-reality, or in another word, fundamental, right? Primordial, elder godlike. One might even plausibly suggest Chthonian. As she puts it in the book, Rousseau is the one who's responsible for the progressivist strain we're contending with today with stuff like modern feminism and progressivism, post-structuralism, Foucault, Derrida, otherwise known as the deconstructionalists or the postmodernists, as somebody we know likes to say, who presuppose, or who have started movements or groups who presuppose that the ills of nature, or even just some of the ills of nature, will be fixed with social reform. And this chapter is a complete and utter refutation of that notion. You don't fix nature. Nature fixes you, so to speak. The Marquis de Sade, the most unread major writer in Western literature, as she points out, was a satiric response to Rousseau. And Sade saw where Rousseau ended up, where his ideas led everybody. Led to the Reign of Terror and the tyrannical reign of Napoleon. So, There you have it. She also tracks the grim but fascinating declines of society in times of cultural decadence, which is a big popular topic right now, buddy. Yeah, buddy! Most notoriously in Rome, of course. I love that whole meme, you know, babe, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? Well. Like women, Camille Paglia at once both criticizes men, accurately citing their fallibility, their phallic fallibility, phallic ability, and limits, while at the same time standing in awe of their achievements, drive, power, and what makes them strikingly admirable from a, from a historic, cultural, and artistic perspective. Mostly that, they just keep inventing things and keep pressing forward and keep solving problems, right? They can't help it. But, we're different. We're not capable of a lot of things, namely, like, continuing the species. And we have a lot of anxiety that comes from our desire for control and certainty. That is not necessarily found in women, generally speaking. Men and women, we are fundamentally different creatures, both with intensely unique attributes, strengths, and weaknesses. Alienated from each other, civilization crumbles. Together, unified, we literally rule the fucking world. And then, we all die, because nature is never really truly ruled, dominated, or subdued, as it instructs us to do so in the Bible. Nature will erode all of our strongest foundations and cast them into history like scattering funereal ashes into the wind. She will do it without passion and without mercy, both of which will make no difference to her. It is both a reason for humans to love and hate her, fear her, She writes in the chapter, "In sex, man is driven into the very abyss which he flees. He makes a voyage to non-being and back." See, now we're edging on Bataille territory. This is probably why I love the book. She and Bataille share the same major influences. Those would be Freud, Sade, and Nietzsche. Bataille is far more Paglia's ally than her foe, I think, personally. Even though the post-structuralists were heavily influenced by Bataille, those being like Foucault and Derrida, and Deleuze, I think, as well. Deleuze, I don't know what Deleuze is. I think he's a post-structuralist, but I'm not sure. I have Anti-Oedipus on the shelf. I want to read it. But Camille Paglia has what I would call a blunt force charm. To call her a provocateur is an understatement and implies a diminutive nuisance, right? Paglia is a force of nature, an intellectual volcano, an intellectual machine gun. So she went to Yale, and Sexual Personae was eventually published by Yale University Press in 1990, and it had been rejected at that point by 7 other publishers. Harold Bloom, the literary critic titan and professor at Yale, was her mentor and gave her a nice blurb on this as well. More than nice. In fact, he said that there is no book comparable in scope, stance, design, or insight. He was her dissertation director at the Yale Graduate School. This book was actually an expansion of her doctoral degree at Yale, which she received in 1974, so this is actually a considerably old book, at least at its origins. She also, prior to writing to this, and I thought this was very interesting, wanted to be an archaeologist. So this dovetails with her archaeological research for the book, right? It certainly has that tone in some areas. She discusses the Venus of Willendorf and stuff like that, the Egyptians, Egyptian culture, Nefertiti, Cleopatra, digging up the essence of cultures of yore, right? Greco-Roman or otherwise. I learned from her in the book that Western culture is comprised of 2 others, Judeo-Christian and Greco-Roman, which, as she points out, goes all the way back to Babylon in ancient Mesopotamia, which is now Iraq. Paglia really knows and emphasizes the importance of history. As she said in this video below, we need to have a sense of tradition, history, chronology, things moving down in time. And elsewhere she said, study history. Nothing ever lasts, and what comes after you may be far worse than what you're trying to reform right now. And she's absolutely correct. That's one of the things I really appreciated about the book, is that you do get a sense of orientation at what point in time you're living in, what has come before you, and that's very helpful to really understand the tectonic shifts that have come prior, to get an idea of where you stand and where the earth is right, where the sands are right now before they shift again. And to do it through art and culture is just so fascinating, and to get a sense of how much there's been and how things have fed upon one another and risen up and then fallen down is just epic. Doesn't even begin to describe the tone of this book and all of the ideas floating in here, all of the ghosts, right? Of which they're myriad. It's overwhelmingly interesting to somebody who's interested in literature and art. and mythology and psychology and all of these things. And the thing is that in spite of her venom, in spite of her aggression, her very forward, assertive nature, she is really wonderful. She's a very emotionally deep and empathetic person, and you can feel that within the passionate ferocity, right? It seems obvious to me that this is coming from a place of enraptured, almost ecstatic devotion to art and culture. And there are so few people, there are so few minds and personalities who have that kind of gusto, to use a Bloomian word, that kind of enthusiasm. Not only enthusiasm, like true love for culture, for artists and art and history and personality and all these things, all these archetypes, all these beautiful, beautiful things about Western culture and civilization that are so often sneered at or, just disregarded and forgotten and broken down or apart to make way for whatever is new, which is often just a rehashing of what they just broke anyways, except the first ones did it better. And that comes across. And to me, it's very beautiful. It's cool to witness. It's inspiring. And it's one of the most beautiful commentaries on Western art and civilization that I've ever read in my life. It makes me happy to be a part of it, It's very in vogue to despise or denigrate Western civilization, the West. And I don't, in the slightest. I think it's the greatest civilization that has ever existed, ever. And I'm very happy to be a part of it. In spite of its faults, of which there are plenty, don't get me wrong, it has lifted more people up than anything the world has ever seen before, to the best of our knowledge. So that's like bordering on patriotism, which for me is not my usual flair or bent. So that's if the book can get me to appreciate my place in history like this, like that, that's really saying something. And it's very interesting to have masculine beauty and conservative Judeo-Christian culture defended by an out-and-out feminist, lesbian atheist, and seemingly mostly traditional left-leaning personality. She's implied that gay marriage and the public incorporation of trans culture are symptoms of cultural decadence, pointing to the decline and fall of Rome, and defends the Bible as one of the greatest works of art, as Christianity was in fact a response to the paganism of Rome, which included the aforementioned. But she's a self-described pagan, Now, does she have it out for the gay and trans community? No, I'd say like in her own way, she's almost certainly a part of it. But she maintains that there are things related to sex and gender that should not be discussed or expressed publicly, but rather privately, or in the domain of art. That's her opinion. I would really love to hear her speak about what's going on today in America and the West in general. Anecdotally, I've discovered much of what she's written to accurately correspond to my experience of art and reality. Even if one doesn't agree with her, and I don't always agree with her, it's great material to struggle with intellectually. I loved having a guide to history in this book. You get the feeling her pen can't keep up with her mind, right? I don't know, it's odd. I finally felt, it's a weird thing to say, but like, I finally felt understood as a man. Like, yeah, somebody gets it, right? Yeah, it's interesting, just reading the book, it's like, wow, we're all pretty fucking weird. Like when you just think about it, like the nature of everything. And we're so confused now because we're getting so many mixed messages. Both genders. It almost seems like somebody's trying to turn us against each other when we used to just, kind of like naturally get along, I remember those days, or at least I feel like I remember those days. Who knows? Maybe I just got older and everything got more complicated, but I don't think so. I think with the rise of blah, 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 this Latin technology and all this crap, I think we've entered a new era wherein we're just competing in the wrong ways. You know what I mean? It's not a question of somebody having more power than the other or somebody having too much power or too little power. It's the wrong kinds of power over each other. I mean, yeah, capitalism, I get it. But capitalism, as she points out too, like emancipated women. Capitalism made it possible for women to become untethered from the necessity of men, right? So she's pro-capitalist in that respect, as I am too. But there are obvious problems. So that's not an easy one at all. That's a whole different issue. Severe understatement, I get it. But yeah, I mean, it's wonderful material worth considering. Everything in here and everything that comes from it, you know? The first time I saw her on this interview on YouTube from like 92 or something, I was disgusted. Because I was a big Susan Sontag fan, and there's this clip, this famous clip, I think, where she's just totally shredding her. And she was just talking mad shit like this narcissistic Looney Tune. And if I remember correctly, she had these big like shoulders in her suit. And it put me off from reading her, unfortunately, because I didn't have the context. And then I realized that she was kind of taking the piss, right? And I was the asshole who didn't know any better. I was just cursory glance and, oh, who the fuck is this? You know, like talking shit about Sontag. I love Sontag, which I do. But Paglia loved Sontag's work too. It was what Sontag became that Paglia was criticizing, and I didn't know about this. And to some degree, I think Paglia was correct in her assertions, but I'm not entirely sure. I'm not sure if Paglia was correct, but I will say that if one were just to watch that clip and think that's all there is to her, one would be severely misled, is what I'm saying. I feel as though perhaps she, Paglia, operates in this twilight gender realm, right? With both perspectives, male and female. Critical of both, a lover of both, but able to walk between the tribes to discover the truth. She occupies a very rare intellectual space. Not only just intellectually, but physically. You know, in her tastes and preferences sexually, psychologically, physically, maybe even, I'm not sure. But she's able to walk between the tribes and discover the truth they're both blind to, right? And I love that. She's a truly unique individual, if just for that. She's a fighter, you know? You can trace her intellectual lineage through to someone contemporary like Douglas Murray, right? Who has discussed ideas by her, I believe, in the past, at least once. It seems to me there's a great deal of wisdom inside this book. But some of it is bordering on nihilistic. For example, her discussion of the sexual act between men and women. She describes love as the spell by which he puts his sexual fear to sleep. Which brings me to the biggest revelation of the book. In terms not only of our biology, but our history as well. Truly, we know nothing, right? Neither about ourselves or what's come before us. Our scope of understanding is so small and narrow. I mean, really. Our control over ourselves via our knowledge of ourselves is fractional to what could reasonably constitute the term control, right? We know nothing, man. I mean, we know nothing about ourselves, about other people, about the world, about our place in it, about what's come before us, about where we came from. We know fuck all. I mean, really. Free will may as well be a myth. We don't know fuck. Like, we know nothing. Like, the locus of control is just... She is very hyperbolic. So if you don't jive well with that, you're going to have it's going to be a slog. I love it, personally. As Grail Marcus said, it is like poetry. I reviewed Paglia's Break, Blow, and Burn a few years back, and it was all about poetry, which I loved it. Her devotion to poets and poetry is obvious. And while these claims and denunciations and criticisms are all big, broad-stroke provocations, the emotional power behind these ideas and the way she flows from one idea to the other is like watching enormous waves crash onto a weathered, jagged cliff, with the roar and spray and the screams of the gulls and the painful heat of the burning sun hitting your face and blinding you briefly. And then there's a huge storm that just pummels you. Rain pouring all over you. Just raise your arms up and you scream and you can't even hear yourself because the wind is so loud, and you open your mouth just to scream in catharsis, right? Because it feels good. And you can't even hear yourself because the surf and the wind are too loud. And it's just like you're roaring along with nature, right? That's what the book feels like. It feels like you're at one in the maelstrom. It's this feeling of togetherness in the maelstrom of existence. And that's just beautiful. That's just beautiful. There are so few reading experiences like that. I could probably count them on 3.5 fingers. An enormous sensation of a book, in all the better senses of sensation, as Harold Bloom, her mentor, said. Better than food, without question. Absolutely. Check it out. And it's often shaded with, like, tones of Lovecraftian weird fiction, grotesque decadent literature bordering on horror, and like rock and roll criticism, and film criticism, and history books. I mean, it's all of these things combined, right? Again, these personae, these masks, these voices, these various personalities all speaking in like, you know, it's just like, it's an intellectual haunted house. It's wonderful. The bit about women's pregnancy reminded me of Possession by Zulawski. I loved it. It's fucking mad, as the English would say. Yeah, I love this book already. Chapter 1. I love it. Every single line in this chapter feels like you're getting punched in the face by an intellectual Conor McGregor. By the way, I suggest you check out the new Roadhouse with Jake Gyllenhaal. Not a bad action film. It's a good bad movie. The cinematography makes you feel like you're getting punched the fuck out. Very Gaspar Noé, actually. Really impressive. Not a damn intellectual thing about that film, but something I feel Paglia might appreciate. Although there are definitely, you know, films these days are just subpar, but anyways. But the energy is just so explosive and it's something to marvel at, coming at you full force before you even have a chance to think. The film gets me pumped. This book gets me pumped. I'm generally pumped these days and I can't calm down. Help me. She's the Russell Crowe of intellects. Fighting round the world, smacking you in the face with something and seeing how you react. And here's what seems implicit that is very different from other thinkers and personalities who do this kind of thing. Encouraging you to fight back intellectually. She has that tone about her. She wants to see what you're going to bring to the table, whereas others, they just want to like decimate you and destroy you, just like drive you into the ground with their points and their facts and their whatever opinions and points of view. Paglia is kind of drawing a saber and saying en garde. Like she wants to fight. She's ready and she can work a sword. I get the sense that Paglia is not like these other thinkers that try to decimate their competition out of fear of being defeated or made to look bad or something. Oh no, Paglia likes to fight. She wants to fight. I just think of McGregor never losing his smile, right? Interesting piece of direction in the film, no? He only lost it once when he confronts Jake and he says, "There's something wrong with you." Me too. That's Paglia, force of nature, right? Natural affinity, programmed to do this. It's in her DNA. Born an intellectual Amazon. And by that I mean female warrior, of course. It's really a piece of writing to marvel at. Not since reading Sartre or Nietzsche have I been like, whoa, the energy. You know, it's speculated Nietzsche was actually influenced by Sartre. Pretty sure it was Paglia who said that in here. And that must be true when you think about it. You can absolutely see it, especially in the orgiastic use of exclamation points, right? I just keep thinking of Dodemancé in Philosophy in the Boudoir, spewing his atheistic philosophy while buggering whomever, right? Ah, great, fuck, ah. If you're of age, please read it. It's a good one. I mean, if anything in there is to be taken seriously, it's tempered by the absurdly humorous narrative, which I feel is kind of the hallmark of a wise philosopher, no? The ability to blend truth and humor. I love Sartre. Forever. Not only is this refreshingly contrarian to all fringe sides in an era of polemical idiocy, but it's a balanced and nuanced defense of individual critical thinking and the greatest parts of what Western culture has developed. I can't speak of it highly enough. It feels so obvious to say this, as if it were just a common sense notion, barely worth discussing until you realize we're right back in the same place she was raging against when she wrote it. Outstanding. Better than food. And I feel like I haven't even gotten to the review. Like, this is why there's a series. There's just so much good shit in here. So as you can see, as it is such an enormous and all-encompassing book, there's positively no way I could simply review this in one video. And I feel like it would have been a waste to try, you know? There's far too much in here to discuss, and the vast majority of it is worth doing so. And I can't wait to speak with you all about it on Patreon. So once again, link below, and I'll see you there. Thanks for your support. And with that, coffee time. For those of you who are new, thank you very much for stopping by and watching. I take the names of all the patrons on Patreon who have donated $5 or more per video, I place their names in this jar, and for every review I do, I pull out a name, and whoever's name is pulled out, I send them a hard copy of the book I'm reviewing, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly. And the coffee is delicious. If you would like to get in on that and help support the show, thank you very much. I sincerely appreciate it. You can click on the link below or go to patreon.com/books better than food and donate $5 or more per video, and that will also get you access to the Sexual Personae series that I'm launching today. You'll also get access to all the Patron-Only Reviews, the Discord channel, plus a Better Than Friday newsletter that I send out every Friday, which is just a weekly list of 5 different things I'm interested in. Could be books in the pipeline, films, music, articles, changes week to week, podcast episodes. If you think we have similar taste, I think you'll really enjoy that. And there's literally hundreds of them. So there's a whole catalog of stuff for you to sift through. Whether you need new books, music, film recommendations, all kinds of stuff. Also, international shipping is included. Also, this is new, for patrons only, I'm going to release the audio files. I'm going to post the audio files of all the reviews, so you can listen to them like a podcast. You don't necessarily need to watch the video. So that will be coming soon as well, because the patrons voted yes on the poll I gave. If you're a patron, I really love your input, and I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you very much. You will also get to vote sometimes for which books I review next, and also occasionally which patron-only reviews I do next. Thank you very much, all my... Ooh. Thank you very much to all my patrons, and best of luck. Okay, here we go. Thunder. Sapphin. Sapphin? Sapphin R. Thank you very much, Sapphin. Really appreciate it. You're going to receive Sexual Personae by Camille Paglia, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly, and I hope you love both. Cheers. Please subscribe if you have not already, and hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed this, and always remember, die reading. All right. If you would like to watch and be involved in the supplementary live stream for this review on Patreon, then please sign up as soon as possible using the link below, and we'll see you there. Cheers. Be sure to read the chapter first. You can also do Audible, if you don't have time. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoy this series, and lots more to come. Cool. Take care of yourselves. Have a great night. See you on Patreon. Talk to you soon. Ciao.